Now we're going to turn our attention to part two of our class. And in doing so, take some of the ideas that we talked about in part one, looking at culture, what culture provides people, what it does for people. And then we'll turn our attention to the article in which we can see all these things coming together. And then we're going to apply the article and these ideas that we're discussing to the social world in our second in class assignment. So let me pull up some slides here. And so here we're going to get into our first subtopic of the semester, looking at what we call the social construction of reality. And the social construction of reality simply captures how people, through interaction, create social life. So social life doesn't emerge out of thin air, doesn't come out of the blue, but social life, our realities, are created through different social interactions. And this is what we're looking at here. And we're going to look at its connection to culture, because it has a strong connection to culture. And I say this strong relationship between culture and the construction of reality can be understood as culture solidifies, it promotes a functional social reality. So when people are coming from similar cultures, when they're sharing norms, when they're sharing values, when they speak the same language, social order can be created as a result. But think about people are coming from different cultural ways. They embrace different values, they speak different languages, they practice different norms. There would be disorder, dysfunction rather than function. So when you share a culture, when everybody's on the same page, you can promote a functional reality. And then also, once everybody shares a culture, you naturalize reality social construction. And by you naturalize it, it just seems the way of things. You seem like to be, the fish in water. You feel at place when you're within your own culture. You can't imagine things to be any other way. But again, you have to recognize that social life and culture are not natural, they're created. And the best way to kind of recognize this is to go to a new culture. So think about if you've ever been to a new culture, whether it be, going from an urban space to a rural space, or simply going to a new country that has a different culture. There, you're taken out of your comfort zone, and you quickly realize how life is socially constructed differently there. People speak different languages, people wear different clothing, and they, again, follow different norms. So when you share a culture, you create order, a functional society, and when everybody shares a culture and you know it well, it just seems natural to you. But it's nothing natural innately. It's only natural because you know it. And again, it's to prove that, go to a new culture and you'll feel like a fish out of water. Things will feel very unnatural to you. So I compare this to learning how to play a sport. The first job, my first paying job that I had was at a local YMCA, and I was refereeing kids soccer. So I just remember it was a co-ed league, and like 7 and 8 year olds playing together, and I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't have any expectations. So when I went to my first game to ref, I was kind of caught off guard because it was chaotic. Me playing soccer, me knowing how the game is played, I just assumed that there would be order. People would be following the rules and the kids would be playing the game how it's supposed to be played. But because they were so young, a lot of the kids playing soccer for the first time in an organized space, in an organized league, it was chaos. Kids were not, doing what they're supposed to do in their positions. Everybody was trying to pick up the ball with their hands. The goalie wouldn't stay in the goal. So it was chaos. Rather than a functional reality, there was a dysfunctional reality. But over time, as those same kids grow up and continue to play soccer, you would imagine that once they learn the culture of the game, once they start to learn the rules of the game, then more order is going to be created. What was once a dysfunctional reality becomes a functional reality once they learn and start to play by the rules. So again, nothing's ever perfect. There's always going to be a little bit of disorder, a little bit of dysfunction. But nevertheless, when you share a culture, you create order when you follow that culture. Just like in a sports league, when people don't know the rules, it's going to be chaotic. But when people do know the rules and follow the rules, you create order as a result. And once you kind of know the rules of the game, again, you don't think about it. It's very automatic. It seems natural. But all you have to do is think back to the first time you played the game. It was unnatural. You didn't know anything. You had to learn it first. So that's how we're looking at culture and how the social construction of reality really come together. And so let's turn our attention to the Clarke piece. So the Clarke piece compared to the Mills piece, I believe, kind of easier to understand, short and simple, yet I think a very informative article, especially tying it to the social construction of reality today. So Clarke basically says, humans can't depend on instincts to navigate social life. We simply are not born with innate knowledge about what to do, what not to do. We have to learn how to navigate the social world. We have to learn different meanings in terms of what to do and not to do through cultural socialization. So we rely on culture to properly practice social life. We rely on our culture to properly construct a functional social reality. And we can look at what we consider good, bad. Again, we're not born with this knowledge. We have to learn it through culture. What is wrong, what is right, what to eat, what not to eat, how to dress, how not to dress. All these things have to be learned. And because culture is something fluid, culture changes over time, culture changes from place to place. What's considered good in one society may be considered bad in another. What's considered to be right, what's considered to be wrong, may change over time, may change from place to place during the same time period. The article talked about eating different things, specifically the example of eating dog. So in Western cultures, if you bring up the idea of eating dog, most people will probably be a little bit disgusted by just the thought that the dog could be a meal. But if you go to other societies, they'll think differently. They're born and they're exposed to a culture that eating dog is perfectly normal. So culture is very fluid. It changes from one place to another. It changes over time within our own culture. So, looking at how to dress, how not to dress. Sometimes you may look at a picture of a parent or a grandparent and kind of shake your head, be like, I don't believe you wore your hair like that. Sure, I don't believe, you wore those clothes. What were you thinking? But more likely than not, if you would have been living 30 years ago, 60 years ago, you would have dressed in the same way. You would have done your hair in a similar way because culture really has a strong hand in terms of what we wear and how we kind of present ourselves socially speaking. So we learn our culture through socialization. So socialization was the second part of the article. And basically socialization allows us to make culture that's an external social force. So culture, it's external in the sense that it's there before we're born, and culture will continue to be there after we die. It's outside of the individual. But we make culture part of the individual when we expose and re-expose them to cultural ways. So eventually, through that exposure and re-exposure, we make culture the external force, part of our internal social psychological makeup. And again, that process is what we call socialization. So I just have a picture of a girl dressed in some, mid 1990s, early 1990s, grunge apparel. And I always think about this because if I look at my junior year in high school yearbook, it's just funny to look at because almost all the boys in my class were wearing flannel shirts. This looked kind of like silly, like it was planned or something like that, but it wasn't. It was just the fashion at the time. Everybody was wearing, flannel shirts, and we were a product. We were a product of the culture in which we were living, and we were wearing the flannel shirts as a result. So now we can, take these ideas we discussed in the second part here in the first lecture part and apply them to our second in-class assignment. So the second in-class assignment I like to think about as trying to reveal culture in action, because culture is influencing us, on a day-to-day basis, but we're so used to its influence, we typically don't recognize it. We typically don't see it when it's there. So here, the activity is pretty simple. What I want you to do is start to recognize how cultural ways do shape our daily lives. And so for the activity specifically, I want you to select one of two different social activities. So activity one is going on a first date, and activity two is going to a professional football game. So here for the assignment, basically what I'm looking for you to do is come up with four different cultural ways that influence how you're doing your selected activity. So how you go on a first date, how does your culture kind of shape how that operates, how that unfolds? And how does culture kind of shape how you go to a professional football game? How does that culture kind of tell you what to do, what not to do? So, a little bit more specifically, you could talk about, do you do it individually or do you do it in more group-like settings? So, for the football game, yeah, you can go to a football game by yourself, but typically, the culture says you're supposed to go with other people. It's a more social event rather than an individual event. So we're not talking about doing anything against the law, but rather something that is cultural normative. So that's what I'm asking you to highlight. Kind of what is cultural normative in these settings? Do you do it by yourself? Do you go with other people? What type of dress do you wear? What are the different rituals within the activity? So yeah, you go on a date, but what goes on kind of normally inside that first date? Yeah, you do go to the game, but what goes on within that game experience? And talk about certain things as conversation. So what are some conversation topics that are on the table or perhaps off the table according to what the culture of the first date tells you of the culture of the professional football game? So, the culture matters because if you go on a fifth date, the fifth time you go out with somebody, the culture is a little bit different compared to the first time. And then again, if you go to different sporting events, so let's go if you go to a professional polo event, the culture of going to such a sporting event that's polo rather than professional football is much different in terms of how you approach it, whether it be how you dress or the different rituals inside of it. So again, for the assignment, talk about the different cultural ways that are there that kind of dictate what we do and how we do it, and simply kind of try to think about that culture being there. Although typically we don't think about it, typically we don't capture how it is influencing what we do and how we do it. So as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me and let you know, and I will continue to be in touch with you.